The whispers started the moment Tabitha Jensen stepped off the wagon train in Clifton Hill, Missouri, her twisted right foot barely touching the dusty ground before the church ladies began their predictions of her certain spinsterhood. It was May of 1867, and the war had left the small frontier town desperately short of women. Yet even that scarcity couldn't silence the cruel certainty in their voices that no man would ever want a girl who couldn't walk straight, much less keep a proper house. Tabitha heard every word as she limped toward the general store where her aunt and uncle had arranged for her to work. Her parents had died of cholera 2 winters back in Ohio, leaving her with nowhere to go but west to relatives she'd never met. At 20 years old, she'd long ago accepted that her clubfoot made her different. But acceptance didn't dull the sting of hearing Mrs. Pritchard tell Mrs. Hannigan that it was a shame about the Jensen girl's pretty face being wasted on such a crippled body. "Pay them no mind," her Aunt Cordelia said sharply, linking her arm through Tabitha's as they walked the wooden boardwalk. "This town's got more gossip than good sense." Uncle Raymond owned the Mercantile, a modest establishment that supplied miners, trappers, and settlers with everything from flour to rifle ammunition. The building smelled of leather and tobacco, coffee beans, and lye soap. Tabitha's new home was a small room above the store, barely large enough for a bed and washstand, but it had a window overlooking the main street, and she told herself it was enough. That first week passed in a blur of learning inventory, measuring yards of calico, and weighing out sugar and salt. Her foot ached constantly from standing, but she bit her tongue and pushed through. She couldn't afford to complain, not when her aunt and uncle had taken her in out of Christian duty rather than affection. Uncle Raymond watched her with perpetual disappointment, as if her limp personally offended him. It was the following Saturday when she first saw Marcus Wade. The morning had brought a cold rain unusual for late spring, and Tabitha was restocking shelves near the front window when a massive figure darkened the doorway. She looked up and nearly dropped the box of candles she was holding. The man had to duck to enter, his shoulders so broad they nearly brushed both sides of the frame. He wore buckskin clothing darkened by rain, and his light brown hair hung past his collar in damp waves. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but couldn't hide the strong jaw beneath. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale blue and startling in their intensity. "Help you?" Uncle Raymond's voice was tight. He never liked the mountain men who came down from the hills, considering them barely civilized. "Need supplies," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "Heading back up to my trap lines for the summer. Got a list." He pulled a folded piece of paper from inside his jacket and handed it to Uncle Raymond, who read it with increasing displeasure. "This'll take some time to gather, an hour at least. I'll wait." The mountain man's gaze swept the store and landed on Tabitha. She felt pinned by those pale eyes, unable to look away. Something flickered across his face, recognition or surprise, she couldn't tell which. "You can come back," Uncle Raymond said firmly. "Said I'll wait." There was steel beneath the quiet words. The mountain man moved to lean against the wall near the door, water dripping from his clothes onto the wooden floor. Uncle Raymond's face reddened, but he knew better than to argue further. Mountain men were dangerous when crossed, and this one looked particularly formidable. "Tabitha, start pulling items from this list." She limped forward to take the list, acutely aware of the stranger's eyes following her uneven gait. Her cheeks burned with familiar shame. The list was extensive: flour, salt, coffee, dried beans, sugar, tobacco, ammunition, rope, needles and thread, a new skinning knife, and various other supplies. She began gathering items, trying to ignore the mountain man's presence. "You're new," His voice startled her as she reached for a sack of flour. She glanced back. He hadn't moved from his position by the door, but his attention was entirely focused on her. "Yes, sir, came last week from Ohio. That's too heavy for you." He pushed off the wall and crossed to her in 3 long strides. Before she could protest, he lifted the 50-pound flour sack as if it weighed nothing and carried it to the counter. The muscles in his arms and shoulders flexed beneath the wet buckskin, and Tabitha found herself staring. "Thank you," she managed. "Name's Marcus Wade." He studied her openly. "What's yours?" "Tabitha Jensen." She smoothed her skirt nervously. "I should finish gathering your supplies." "I'll help." It wasn't a question. For the next hour they worked in strange tandem. Tabitha would indicate what was needed, and Marcus would fetch anything heavy or on high shelves. Uncle Raymond watched with a disapproving scowl but said nothing. Marcus asked her questions in that low, rumbling voice. Where in Ohio? Did she like Missouri? How long did she plan to stay? She answered carefully, unsure what to make of this giant man who moved with surprising grace and looked at her as if her limp didn't exist. When everything was finally assembled and wrapped, Marcus paid with coins and folded bills from a leather pouch. "You work every day?" he asked as Uncle Raymond tallied the final amount. "Every day but Sunday," Tabitha said. Marcus nodded slowly, as if filing this information away. He gathered his supplies, distributed them into 2 large packs, and swung both over his shoulders with casual strength. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. "I'll be seeing you, Tabitha Jensen." Then he was gone, striding into the rain-soaked street. "Don't get ideas," Uncle Raymond said sharply. "Men like that don't marry. They use women and move on." Tabitha felt her face flame. "I wasn't thinking anything of the sort." But she was lying. Something about Marcus Wade had stirred something in her chest, a flutter of possibility she'd thought long dead. She told herself not to be foolish. A man like that, strong and capable, would never look twice at a crippled girl. He was just being kind, the way people sometimes were when they felt sorry for her. Summer settled over Clifton Hill with oppressive heat. The store stayed busy as settlers prepared for the journey further west, and Tabitha's days blurred together in exhausting sameness. Her foot ached constantly, swelling in her boot until she wanted to weep. She developed a system of shifting her weight and taking brief moments to sit when Uncle Raymond wasn't watching, but by evening she could barely climb the stairs to her room. Marcus didn't return, and she told herself she was relieved. Then July brought a surprise. Tabitha was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the store when a familiar massive figure emerged from the crowd. Marcus Wade looked even larger than she remembered, his buckskin clothing sun-bleached and his beard neatly trimmed. He carried a bundle wrapped in canvas. "Miss Jensen." He stopped in front of her, and she noticed his hair had been cut shorter, though it still brushed his collar. "Mr. Wade. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Finished my trap line early, had good luck this season." He held out the bundle. "Brought you something." She stared at the package, confused. "I don't understand." "Open it." Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the canvas. Inside was the most beautiful pair of moccasins she'd ever seen, made from butter-soft deerskin with intricate beadwork across the toes. But what made her breath catch was the right moccasin, carefully crafted with extra room and padding to accommodate her twisted foot. "How did you know?" She whispered. "I've got eyes. Saw how that boot was hurting you. These should be more comfortable." His voice was gruff, almost embarrassed. "If they don't fit right, I can adjust them." Tears pricked her eyes. No one had ever made something specifically for her deformity before. People either pretended not to notice or stared with pity, but Marcus had done something practical, something kind. "I can't accept these. They must have taken hours to make. They're already made. Be wasteful not to use them." He shifted his weight. "Try them on." Here, why not? Tabitha glanced around. The street was busy with afternoon traffic, but no one was paying them particular attention. She sat on the bench outside the store and unlaced her boot, wincing as she pulled it off her swollen foot. The relief was immediate. Marcus knelt in front of her, and she was struck again by his sheer size. His hands were huge, scarred, and calloused, but gentle as he helped her slide her twisted foot into the specially made moccasin. It fit perfectly. The left moccasin went on easily, and when she stood, she nearly cried. For the first time in years, walking didn't immediately hurt. The soft leather flexed with her movements, and the extra padding supported her clubfoot without pinching or rubbing. "They're perfect," she breathed. "Thank you, Mr. Wade. Thank you so much." "Marcus," he said, standing. "Just Marcus." "Then you must call me Tabitha," he smiled, and it transformed his entire face from rugged to almost handsome. "Tabitha, that's a good name, biblical. My mother was very religious. Mine too. That's why I spend most of my time in the mountains." The smile turned wry. She thought dancing and liquor were tools of the devil, couldn't live up to her expectations, so I stopped trying. Before Tabitha could respond, Uncle Raymond appeared in the doorway. "Tabitha, there are customers waiting. Stop lounging about." "Yes, Uncle." She bent to gather her old boots. "I'll take those," Marcus said, scooping them up. "Get them resoled for you. Return them next time I'm in town." "Marcus, you don't have to do that." "Want to?" He tucked the boots under his arm. "You working tomorrow?" "Every day but Sunday." "Then I'll see you Sunday. There's a church social in the afternoon. You should come." He tipped his head to her and strode away before she could explain that she never attended church socials, that sitting alone while everyone else danced and courted was more painful than her foot ever could be. That night, Aunt Cordelia noticed the moccasins. "Where did you get those?" "A customer made them for me," Tabitha said carefully. As thanks for good service, her aunt's eyes narrowed. "What customer?" "Does it matter? They help my foot." "It matters if you're encouraging inappropriate attention. You're under our care, Tabitha, and we won't have our reputation tarnished by a niece who acts improperly." "I haven't acted improperly." The accusation stung. "A man gave me shoes because he saw I was in pain. That's all. Men don't give women gifts for nothing. Remember your place. You're lucky to have a roof over your head and honest work. Don't jeopardize that by getting romantic notions about men who are far above your station." Tabitha bit back the retort that mountain men weren't exactly high society, but arguing with Aunt Cordelia was pointless. She retreated to her room and lay on her narrow bed, running her hands over the beautiful moccasins. Marcus had spent hours creating something specifically for her, thinking about her comfort, her needs. The gesture meant more than he could possibly know. Sunday arrived hot and cloudless. Tabitha attended morning services with her aunt and uncle, sitting in the back pew as usual. She told herself she wouldn't go to the social, that Marcus had probably just been being polite and wouldn't actually expect her to appear. But as the afternoon wore on, and she heard the sounds of music and laughter drifting from the church grounds, curiosity got the better of her. She changed into her best dress, a simple blue calico that brought out her eyes, and braided her dark hair into a crown around her head. The moccasins felt strange with a dress, but she couldn't bear to put her boots back on. Taking a deep breath, she made her way down the stairs and out into the summer heat. The church grounds were crowded with people. Tables laden with food stretched along one side, while a group of men with fiddles and a banjo provided music for dancing. Children ran and played, and couples strolled arm in arm. Tabitha immediately felt out of place and was about to turn back when a familiar voice stopped her. "You came." Marcus appeared at her elbow, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He'd cleaned up, wearing actual trousers and a cotton shirt instead of buckskins, though the shirt strained across his massive shoulders and chest. His hair was still damp, as if he'd recently dunked his head in the horse trough. "I wasn't sure I should," she admitted. "Why not?" "I don't usually attend these things." "Because of your foot." He said it so matter-of-factly, without pity or judgment. People stare. "Let them." He offered his arm. "Come on. I'm starving, and I heard Mrs. Hannigan brought her fried chicken." Tabitha hesitated, then slipped her hand through his elbow. His arm was solid as oak beneath her palm, and she felt small and strangely protected walking beside him. They made their way to the food tables, and she was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Marcus seemed oblivious, piling 2 plates high with food. They found a spot under a large oak tree away from the main crowd. Tabitha was grateful for the relative privacy, though she could still feel eyes on them. "How are the moccasins working?" Marcus asked around a mouthful of chicken. "Wonderfully. I can actually stand all day without wanting to cry." "Good. That was the idea." He paused. "Your uncle treats you poorly." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "They took me in when they didn't have to. I'm grateful." "Gratitude doesn't mean you should accept mistreatment." "What choice do I have?" The words came out more bitter than she intended. "I have no money, no other family, and who would hire a girl who can't walk properly?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching children play tag near the church. "You ever think about leaving? And go where? Do what?" "There's always options. You're smart and capable. You could find something better than working for relatives who don't appreciate you." "You don't know anything about me," she said, but without heat. "I know you keep books for your uncle without being asked. Saw the ledger on the counter last time I was in. Your handwriting, wasn't it? Perfect columns, everything balanced. I know you recommend products to customers based on what they actually need, not what costs the most. And I know you haven't let that foot of yours turn you bitter, which says more about your character than anything else could." Tabitha stared at him, something warm unfurling in her chest. "You noticed all that." "I notice a lot of things." His pale eyes held hers. "Especially things worth noticing." She didn't know what to say to that, so she looked down at her plate. They ate in comfortable silence, the sounds of the social washing over them. When a new tune started up, couples began pairing off to dance. "I should warn you," Marcus said suddenly. "I can't dance worth a damn." Tabitha laughed. "That makes 2 of us. Probably break your toes if I tried. These feet weren't made for anything but climbing mountains and tracking game." He glanced at her. "But I'd try if you wanted." Her heart squeezed. "That's kind, but I don't think it would work very well." "Probably right." He stood and offered his hand. "Walk with me instead." They strolled the perimeter of the church grounds, moving slowly to accommodate Tabitha's limp. Marcus matched his stride to hers without seeming to think about it, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a burden. He told her about his life in the mountains, about trap lines and wildlife, about the silence of winter snow and the rush of spring creeks. His voice painted pictures of a world she'd never imagined, wild and beautiful and dangerous. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I'm not good with people, never have been. In the mountains, there's no one to disappoint, no expectations to fail." "I understand that." He looked at her. "I think you do." They talked until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, and Tabitha realized with shock that hours had passed. She'd never felt so comfortable with another person, so able to speak freely without weighing every word. Marcus listened when she talked about her parents, about growing up different, about the dreams she'd abandoned because they seemed impossible for someone like her. "What were the dreams?" he asked. "Silly things. Having a home of my own, maybe a small garden, children someday." She laughed self-consciously. "I told you they were silly." Nothing silly about wanting a family. It is when no one wants to give you one. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her fully. The setting sun cast golden light across his features, making his eyes almost glow. Some people are fools then, her breath caught. Marcus. I mean it, Tabitha. Any man would be lucky to have you. You don't have to say that. I know what I am. Do you? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were gentle despite their size. You're brave and kind and stronger than most people I've met. You work hard without complaining, you're smart as a whip, and you've got the prettiest smile I've ever seen. Your foot doesn't change any of that. Tears pricked her eyes. Why are you being so nice to me? Because I want to. His hand lingered near her face. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I first walked into that store. Because when I'm up in those mountains, alone like I've always preferred, I find myself wishing you were there to talk to. You barely know me. Then let me know you better. Let me call on you properly. Tabitha's heart hammered against her ribs. My aunt and uncle won't approve. I don't care what they approve. I care what you want. His eyes searched hers. What do you want, Tabitha? What did she want? She wanted this feeling to never end, wanted to stay in this golden moment where a man like Marcus Wade looked at her as if she were precious. She wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have those dreams she'd locked away. I want you to call on me, she whispered. His smile could have lit the darkening sky. Then I will. They walked back to the mercantile as twilight fell, and Marcus left her at the door with a promise to return soon. Tabitha climbed to her room in a daze, barely hearing Aunt Cordelia's sharp questions about where she'd been. She lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, replaying every moment and every word. Marcus came to the store 3 days later. Uncle Raymond's disapproval was palpable as Marcus asked formal permission to court Tabitha. Her uncle looked ready to refuse, but Aunt Cordelia, surprisingly, intervened. The girl needs some chance at marriage, she said bluntly, even if it's to a mountain man. Permission granted, albeit grudgingly, Marcus began calling on Tabitha every few days. They would sit on the bench outside the store after closing, talking as the summer evening cooled around them. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers from the hills, smooth river stones, once a perfectly preserved bird's nest. She treasured each one. In August, he took her to see his cabin. They rode out early on Sunday morning, Tabitha sitting in front of him on his massive horse, his arms creating a secure cage around her. The cabin was nestled in a valley between 2 hills, surrounded by pine and oak trees. It was larger than she'd expected, solidly built with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Built it myself over 3 winters, Marcus said as he helped her down from the horse. Added on as I went. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly tidy. One large room served as living space and kitchen, with a sleeping loft above. Furs covered the floor and bed, and shelves held supplies and books. Tabitha was startled to see the books. You read? She asked. My mother insisted I learn. Only thing she ever did I'm grateful for. He ran a hand through his hair. I know it's not much, but it's solid. Roof doesn't leak, chimney draws well, and the spring's only 50 yards away. It's wonderful, Tabitha said honestly. The cabin felt like a real home, warm and welcoming in a way the mercantile never had. Marcus showed her around the property, pointing out where he planned to expand the garden, where the trap line started, where deer came to drink at dusk. They ate a simple lunch of bread and cheese, and Tabitha found herself imagining what it would be like to live here, to wake up in that loft beside Marcus, to tend a garden and keep house in this peaceful valley. Could you be happy here? Marcus asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. It's isolated, miles from town, Winters can be hard. I think I could be very happy here, she said softly. His eyes blazed. Tabitha, I know we haven't been courting long, but I'm not a man who plays games or draws things out. I want you to be my wife. I want to bring you here and spend my life making you happy. I know I'm rough around the edges and I'm not sophisticated or wealthy, but I swear I'll work hard for you. I'll provide and protect and never give you cause to regret saying yes. Her heart felt too large for her chest. Marcus, I love you. The words were simple, direct, devastating in their sincerity. I've loved you since I saw you trying to lift that flour sack, determination written all over your face. I'll love you until I die, clubfoot and all, especially the clubfoot because it's part of you and you're perfect. Tabitha was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I love you too. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. He pulled her into his arms and she disappeared against his broad chest, surrounded by strength and warmth and the steady beat of his heart. When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. They returned to town late that afternoon and immediately informed Aunt Cordelia and Uncle Raymond of their engagement. Uncle Raymond sputtered protests about haste and impropriety, but Aunt Cordelia surprised them again. At least the girl will be settled, she said. Though I don't know what kind of life you'll have up in those hills. A good one, Marcus said firmly. I'll make sure of it. They married 3 weeks later in the small church, with half the town in attendance. Tabitha wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Aunt Cordelia had, astonishingly, purchased for her. Marcus looked uncomfortable in his wedding suit, but his eyes never left her face as they spoke their vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her soundly, drawing scandalized gasps and amused chuckles from the congregation. The wedding supper was held at the hotel, and Tabitha was touched by the number of people who congratulated them sincerely. Even Mrs. Pritchard, who'd predicted Tabitha would die a spinster, wished them well. As the evening wore on and Tabitha's foot began to ache from standing, Marcus noticed immediately. Without a word, he swept her into his arms and carried her out of the hotel, ignoring her protests and the delighted cheers of the wedding guests. He carried her all the way to the livery where his horse waited, settled her gently in the saddle, and swung up behind her. Marcus, people will talk, she said, but she was laughing. Let them talk. You were tired. He wrapped his arms around her and urged the horse forward. I'll carry you whenever you need it, Tabitha Wade. That's a promise. They rode through the gathering darkness toward the cabin that was now her home. Tabitha leaned back against her husband's solid chest and felt more content than she'd ever thought possible. Her clubfoot still twisted awkwardly in its stirrup. She would still limp and tire easily, but none of that mattered anymore. She was loved, wholly and completely, by a man who saw her as she truly was and cherished her anyway. The cabin was dark when they arrived, but Marcus had prepared it earlier in the day. He lit lamps that cast golden light across the room, revealing fresh wildflowers on the table and the bed made up with new quilts. He set Tabitha down carefully and knelt to remove her moccasins, rubbing her aching foot with gentle hands. Better, he asked. Much. She cupped his bearded face in her hands. Thank you for everything, for seeing me when no one else did, for loving me when I'd given up hope. Thank you for saying yes, for trusting me. He stood and pulled her close. I know I'm not always good with words, but I'm good with actions. I'll spend every day showing you that you made the right choice. I already know I did. That night, their marriage became complete in the soft glow of lamplight, Marcus treating her with a tenderness that made her cry happy tears. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the loft, Tabitha's head on Marcus's chest as he stroked her hair. Tell me about tomorrow, she said sleepily. Tomorrow, we start our life. I'll show you how to work the garden, teach you to recognize the plants in the woods. We'll repair the chicken coop because I want to get some hens before fall. In the evening, we'll sit by the fire and read or just talk. And when you get tired, I'll carry you to bed. And the day after, more of the same, and the day after that, and the day after that. He kissed the top of her head. Every day, Tabitha, for the rest of our lives. She smiled against his skin. That sounds perfect. Their first months of marriage were an adjustment. Tabitha had to learn to manage a household without the conveniences of town, to cook on the fireplace, to preserve food for winter, to do laundry in the creek. Her foot made some tasks difficult, but Marcus was endlessly patient, adapting work to accommodate her limitations without making her feel inadequate. He built her a stool so she could sit while cooking. He fashioned a wagon she could pull to haul water from the spring. He did the heavy work without complaint and praised her accomplishments until she glowed with pride. In turn, Tabitha made the cabin into a real home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted flowers around the door, and organized Marcus's haphazard supplies into proper order. She discovered she had a talent for cooking game, creating savory stews and roasts that made Marcus groan with pleasure. In the evenings, she read aloud while he worked on winter preparations, her voice filling the cabin with stories and companionship. They fell into comfortable rhythms, learning each other's habits and preferences. Marcus woke before dawn and always started the fire before rousing Tabitha with gentle kisses. She learned that he liked his coffee strong enough to strip paint and his bread slathered with butter. He learned that she needed time to work the stiffness from her foot each morning, and that she loved watching the sunset from the cabin's porch. September brought the first hints of autumn, and Marcus began preparing for the winter trap season. He would need to leave for weeks at a time to check his lines, something that worried Tabitha despite her efforts to hide it. "You'll be alone," Marcus said one evening, voicing her unspoken concern. "I don't like it, but the furs are our main income." "I'll manage," Tabitha said, more confidently than she felt. "How long will you be gone? 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll stockpile wood and make sure you have everything you need." He pulled her onto his lap. "But if you're scared we can spend winter in town, I can find work there." "No. This is our home. I won't have you giving up your livelihood because of me." "You're more important than any livelihood," she kissed him. "I know, but I'll be fine, truly. I have the rifle and you'll teach me to use it properly. I'm stronger than I look." He studied her face. "You are. Strongest person I know, actually." "All right, but at the first sign of trouble you go to town. Promise me." "I promise." The next weeks were intensive training. Marcus taught Tabitha to shoot the rifle and pistol, to recognize signs of predators near the cabin, to ration supplies, and to signal for help if needed. He showed her which plants were edible and which poisonous, how to set simple snares for rabbits, and how to treat common injuries. By the time he left in late October, she felt reasonably prepared, though her heart ached watching him ride away. The first week alone was strange. The cabin felt too empty, too quiet. Tabitha threw herself into tasks, cleaning thoroughly, finishing the mending, preparing stores for winter. The chickens Marcus had purchased kept her company with their clucking, and she talked to them as she worked. Her foot ached less with the slower pace, and she found herself appreciating the solitude in unexpected ways. The second week brought the first snow, light flurries that dusted the ground. Tabitha woke to find deer tracks in the fresh powder and smiled, remembering Marcus telling her they came down from the high country as winter approached. She spent that day baking bread and making soap, tasks that filled the cabin with comforting smells. Marcus returned on the 13th day, snow-covered and exhausted but grinning. He burst through the door and swept Tabitha into his arms, spinning her around despite his weariness. "Missed you," he said against her hair. "Missed you so damn much." "I missed you too. You're frozen solid. Come warm up." She fed him hot stew and helped him out of his snow-crusted clothes, drawing him close to the fire. He told her about the trap lines, about the fox and beaver he'd caught, about a narrow escape from a territorial bear. She told him about her quiet days, the chickens' antics, the deer she'd watched from the window. "You did good," Marcus said, cupping her face. "I knew you would, but I'm proud of you anyway. It was lonely, but I managed. Next time I'll make the rounds faster." They settled into winter routines. Marcus would leave every 2 weeks to check traps, returning after 10 to 14 days. Tabitha grew more confident with each of his absences, handling problems and challenges that would have terrified her months earlier. When a tree branch broke through the chicken coop roof during a storm, she repaired it herself. When she twisted her bad foot slipping on ice, she bound it and stayed off it until the swelling subsided, managing the household from a chair. Christmas found them snowed in together, a blizzard raging outside while they stayed warm inside. Tabitha had secretly made Marcus a new shirt, carefully stitching the seams to accommodate his broad shoulders. He'd carved her a beautiful jewelry box from cedar, with her name inlaid in lighter wood across the lid. They exchanged gifts on Christmas morning, then spent the day reading and talking and making love as snow piled against the windows. "This is the best Christmas I've ever had," Tabitha said, nestled against Marcus as evening fell. "Mine too." He tightened his arms around her. "Every day with you is the best day." "That's excessive." "It's true." Winter deepened into January and February, months of cold and snow and fierce winds. But the cabin stayed warm, their supplies held out, and Tabitha found she loved the enforced coziness of winter. She and Marcus spent long evenings talking about everything and nothing, learning the deepest parts of each other's hearts and minds. It was in late February that Tabitha first suspected she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had always been irregular, so she'd thought nothing of missing one, but when she missed a second and began feeling queasy in the mornings, realization dawned. She waited another 2 weeks to be sure before telling Marcus. He just returned from checking trap lines and was brushing down his horse when she approached the makeshift stable. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." He looked up, immediately alert to something in her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, at least I don't think so." She twisted her hands nervously. "I'm with child." He froze, the brush stopping mid-stroke. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." Marcus set the brush down carefully, then crossed to her in 2 strides. He knelt in the snow in front of her and pressed his forehead to her stomach. His shoulders shook, and Tabitha realized with shock that he was crying. "Marcus, I'm going to be a father." His voice was muffled against her dress. "We're going to have a baby." She ran her fingers through his hair. "Are you happy about it?" He looked up, tears tracking through the trail dust on his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, amazed, grateful. "You're giving me a family, Tabitha. A real family. We're making one together." He stood and pulled her gently into his arms. "We need to go to town, have the doctor confirm it and make sure everything's all right. After the thaw," she said. "The passes are still snowed in. Then, as soon as they clear. And we're figuring out what you need, what I need to build or buy. A cradle, baby clothes, supplies." He was talking faster now, planning. "Maybe we should stay in town for the birth. It would be safer." "Marcus, slow down. We have months yet." "I know, but I want everything perfect, want you safe and healthy and happy," she smiled. "I am all those things, but yes, we'll plan and prepare. Together." Spring came late that year, snow lingering into April. As soon as the trails cleared, Marcus took Tabitha to town. The doctor confirmed her pregnancy and estimated the baby would arrive in late September or early October. The news spread quickly through Clifton Hill, and Tabitha found herself the recipient of advice and gifts from women she barely knew. Mrs. Pritchard even stopped by the mercantile to offer congratulations, though she couldn't resist adding that childbirth would be extra difficult for someone with Tabitha's affliction. "Pay her no mind," Aunt Cordelia said sharply after Mrs. Pritchard left. "You'll manage the birth same as any woman. Your foot has nothing to do with it." Tabitha was surprised by her aunt's sudden support. Their relationship had been strictly practical before, but now Cordelia seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare. She pressed bundles of fabric for baby clothes into Tabitha's hands, and even gave her some old cradle blankets from when her own children were small. Marcus spent the summer preparing for the baby's arrival with single-minded determination. He built a beautiful cradle from oak, carving animals into the headboard. He expanded the sleeping loft to accommodate a nursery area. He stockpiled firewood for the following winter, determined to stay close to home after the birth. He even made a special chair with a footrest, so Tabitha could comfortably nurse the baby when it arrived. Tabitha's pregnancy progressed normally, though her foot swelled more than usual and walking became increasingly difficult. True to his word, Marcus carried her whenever she tired, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. On days when she felt particularly ungainly and unattractive, he would pull her close and tell her she'd never been more beautiful. "I look like a whale," she complained one evening in August, catching sight of herself in the small mirror. "You look like my wife carrying my child," Marcus said firmly. "Most beautiful sight in the world, you're biased." "Absolutely." He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her swollen belly. "But I'm also right." Labor began on a crisp September evening, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Tabitha's water broke as she was preparing supper, and the first contractions followed quickly. Marcus went pale but snapped into action, settling her on the bed and riding hard for town to fetch the midwife. He returned within 2 hours, the midwife bouncing on the horse behind him. Mrs. Cooper was an experienced woman in her 50s who delivered half the babies in the county. She examined Tabitha and pronounced everything progressing normally, if quickly. "First babies usually take their time, but this one seems eager to meet the world," she said. "You're doing fine, dear. Just breathe through the pains." The labor lasted through the night, waves of pain that left Tabitha gasping and crying out. Marcus stayed by her side, letting her squeeze his hands until his fingers went white, murmuring encouragement and wiping her forehead with cool cloths. As dawn light filtered through the windows, Mrs. Cooper announced it was time to push. Tabitha bore down with everything she had, exhausted but determined. Marcus supported her shoulders, his strength lending her courage. After 3 final pushes, their baby slipped into the world with an indignant wail. "It's a boy," Mrs. Cooper announced, holding up the red-faced, squalling infant. "A healthy boy with a fine set of lungs." Tabitha collapsed back against Marcus, tears streaming down her face as Mrs. Cooper cleaned the baby and wrapped him in blankets. Then their son was placed in her arms, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face. He had Marcus's eyes, pale blue even in the dim morning light, and a surprising amount of dark hair. "He's beautiful," she whispered. Marcus was crying openly, one finger gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. "He's perfect. You're both perfect." He kissed Tabitha's temple. Thank you for him for this." "What will you name him?" Mrs. Cooper asked. Tabitha and Marcus had discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, the answer was obvious. "Matthew," Tabitha said. "Matthew Raymond Wade." "After my brother," Marcus said quietly. His brother had died young, lost to fever before Marcus left civilization for the mountains. "It's perfect." Mrs. Cooper stayed for 2 days, teaching Tabitha to nurse and care for the baby. Matthew was a hungry, alert infant who rarely cried except when wet or hungry. Marcus was completely smitten, holding his son every spare moment and looking at him with such naked adoration that it made Tabitha's heart ache. Recovery was slower than she'd hoped. Her foot, already problematic, had swollen badly during labor and refused to return to normal. Walking was agony for the first week, and even after that remained painful. Marcus handled everything without complaint, caring for both Tabitha and the baby, managing the household, never once making her feel like a burden. "I'm supposed to be helping," she said one afternoon, watching him cook dinner while simultaneously rocking Matthew's cradle with his foot. "You just grew and birthed an entire human. You're doing plenty," he glanced at her. "How's the foot today?" "Better. Still hurts, but better." "Good. Keep resting it." As October arrived and the leaves turned gold and crimson, Tabitha slowly regained her strength. Matthew grew and thrived, his personality emerging day by day. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and fascinated by everything around him. Marcus fashioned a cradle board so Tabitha could carry Matthew while working, distributing the weight to spare her foot. They fell into new rhythms as a family of 3. Marcus postponed his trap lines until Matthew was 3 months old, unwilling to leave Tabitha alone with a newborn. When he finally did go, he made the rounds in record time, returning after just 5 days. "Couldn't stand being away," he admitted, holding Matthew close and breathing in the baby's milky scent. "Missed you both too much." Winter that year was both harder and easier. Harder because caring for an infant through long, cold months was exhausting. Easier because their little family felt complete and joyful even when times were difficult. Matthew's first laugh came on Christmas morning, a gurgling sound of delight that made both parents dissolve into happy tears. His first word, spoken in March, was a mangled version of Papa that had Marcus grinning for days. By the time Matthew turned 1, he was trying to walk, pulling himself up on furniture and taking wobbly steps. Tabitha watched with a mixture of joy and apprehension, terrified he might have inherited her clubfoot. But his feet were perfectly straight, strong and healthy as the rest of him. "He's going to be tall like his father," she said to Marcus one evening as they watched Matthew toddle around the cabin. "And smart like his mother," Marcus added. "Best of both of us." That night, after Matthew was asleep in his cradle, Tabitha broached something she'd been thinking about for months. "I want another baby." Marcus looked up from the leather he was working. "You sure? Last time was hard on you." "I'm sure. I want Matthew to have siblings. I want our family to grow." He set the leather aside and pulled her onto his lap. "Then we'll have another baby, as many as you want, as long as you stay healthy." Their second child, a daughter, was born in the spring of 1870. The labor was faster and easier than the first, and Maria Tabitha Wade entered the world squalling loudly, much to her parents' delight. She had Tabitha's dark hair and Marcus's sturdy build, and her brother was immediately enchanted with her. 2 years later, another son arrived, Thomas Marcus Wade. Unlike his siblings, Thomas was a quiet, thoughtful baby who preferred observing to participating. He was followed 16 months later by a surprise pregnancy that resulted in twin girls, Sarah and Grace, who were as different as night and day despite sharing a face. The cabin that had seemed spacious for 2 was now bursting with children. Marcus expanded again, adding 2 more rooms and a proper second floor. Tabitha managed the chaos with patience and humor, though her foot troubled her more as she aged. There were days when the pain was so severe she could barely stand, and on those days Marcus would swoop in and handle everything, cooking and cleaning and child wrangling without complaint. "You should be resting," he'd say, carrying her to a chair. "I'm fine," she'd protest. "You're in pain." Rest. It became a familiar argument, one they'd had countless times over the years. Tabitha hated feeling useless, but she'd learned to accept Marcus's help without shame. He never made her feel less capable, never treated her disability as a burden. He simply adapted and adjusted, making their life work through sheer determination and love. As the children grew, they learned from both parents. The boys learned to hunt and trap with Marcus, to track game and read the weather. The girls learned these things too, because Marcus believed all his children should be capable and self-sufficient. From Tabitha, they learned letters and numbers, cooking and preserving, the value of hard work and kindness. Matthew, at 10 years old, had grown into a serious boy with his father's quiet strength. He helped manage his younger siblings and took pride in mastering new skills. Maria, at 8, was fearless and adventurous, always climbing trees or exploring the woods. Thomas, at 6, preferred books to outdoor work and had already read everything in the cabin twice. The twins, rounding 4 years old, were energetic tornadoes who kept everyone on their toes. Tabitha watched her family with satisfaction and occasional disbelief. There had been a time when she'd thought this life impossible, when the church lady's predictions had seemed like inevitable truth. A club-footed girl would never marry, never keep house, never have children. She'd proven them all wrong, not through any special ability of her own, but through finding a partner who loved her unconditionally. On a warm evening in June of 1874, the entire family sat on the expanded porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight. Marcus held Thomas on his lap while the twins played at his feet. Matthew and Maria sat on the steps, arguing amiably about whose turn it was to collect eggs in the morning. Tabitha rested in the special chair Marcus had built for her years ago, her aching foot propped on a cushioned stool. "Tell us how you met Papa," Maria said suddenly, as she often did. The children never tired of the story. Tabitha smiled. "Well, I was working in your great-uncle's store and your father came in needing supplies." "And you couldn't lift the flour sack," Matthew added, having heard this 100 times. "That's right, so your father helped me." "Because he was strong," Thomas piped up. "The strongest," Marcus agreed solemnly, winking at Tabitha. "And then he made Mama special shoes for her foot," Maria continued the familiar narrative. "Moccasins," Tabitha corrected. "Beautiful moccasins with beadwork." "I still have them," Marcus said. "Saved them all these years." "Why did Mama's foot make walking hard?" Grace asked. The twins were just old enough to start understanding that their mother was different from other women. Tabitha had answered this question before, but she did so again patiently. "I was born with a clubfoot. It means my foot didn't form quite right, so it twists differently than yours do. It makes walking painful sometimes, and I can't go as fast as other people." "But Papa carries you when you're tired," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "That's right, sweetheart. Papa carries me whenever I need it." Marcus met her eyes across the porch, and the look they shared held years of love and partnership. He'd kept his wedding night promise faithfully, carrying her over rough ground, through difficult times in joy and sorrow. She'd never been a burden to him, just as he'd promised she wouldn't be. "Did people say you couldn't get married because of your foot?" Matthew asked. At 10, he was old enough to understand prejudice. "Some did," Tabitha admitted. "They said I'd never keep house or have a family." "But you did," Maria said proudly. "You keep the best house and we're a family." "We certainly are." Tabitha looked at each of her children in turn, then at her husband. The best family I could have asked for. As darkness fell and the children were herded inside for bed, Marcus lingered on the porch with Tabitha. He sat on the step below her chair and leaned back against her legs, and she ran her fingers through his hair, now shot through with silver at the temples. "You thinking about something?" he asked, just remembering. "That first day you walked into the store, I thought you were the most intimidating man I'd ever seen," he chuckled. "And now I think you're the most intimidating man I've ever seen who also changes diapers and braids little girls' hair. Someone's got to do it. You can't manage it all alone. I never have to, though. You're always there." He turned to look up at her, reaching back to take her hand. "I always will be, until my last breath, Tabitha. You and those kids are everything to me." "I know." She squeezed his fingers. "I love you, Marcus Wade. Thank you for seeing past what everyone else saw." "I didn't see past anything. I saw you exactly as you are, and I loved you for it." He brought her hand to his lips. "The Clubfoot is part of you. It's part of what makes you strong, because you've never let it stop you from living fully. That's because I had you beside me. We had each other. That's how it works." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky. From inside came the muffled sounds of children settling for sleep, squabbles over blankets and last-minute requests for water. Their life was chaotic and messy, and sometimes exhausting, but it was theirs, built from love and determination. The years continued to pass. Matthew grew into a strapping young man who decided to try his hand at farming rather than trapping, clearing land for a homestead just over the next hill. He married at 20, a practical girl named Elizabeth who fit into the family as if she'd always been there. Maria, true to her fearless nature, married a cavalry scout and moved to Fort Leavenworth, writing long letters about Army life that the whole family devoured. Thomas surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Clifton Hill, and boarding with Aunt Cordelia and Uncle Raymond, who'd softened considerably with age. The twins, inseparable as always, married brothers from a neighboring farm and built houses side by side, raising their children as one extended family. Through it all, Marcus and Tabitha remained the center, the foundation upon which their expanding family was built. They grew older together, Marcus's hair going completely silver and Tabitha's face lining with age. Her foot troubled her more with each passing year, the twisted limb growing stiffer and more painful. Some mornings she could barely rise from bed, and Marcus would carry her to the kitchen and settle her in her chair, bringing her breakfast and helping her dress. "I'm a burden now," she said one particularly difficult morning when she was 53 years old. "No," Marcus said firmly. He was 61 now, but still strong, his body seasoned by decades of mountain living. "You're my wife, and caring for you is my privilege, not my burden. You could have had someone whole, someone who could have kept up with you. I had exactly who I wanted, who I still want." He knelt in front of her and took her hands. "Tabitha, listen to me. These past 36 years have been the happiest of my life. Every day with you has been a gift, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones because we faced them together. Your foot has never diminished you in my eyes, not for a single moment. You understand?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I understand. I just hate that you have to do so much for me now. I get to do things for you, that's different." He kissed her gnarled hands. "You gave me everything I never thought I'd have. A home, children, grandchildren, a life full of love and meaning. Carrying you up the stairs at night isn't a hardship, it's an honor." "I love you," she whispered. "I love you more." "Impossible," he smiled. "Then we'll call it a tie." Their 60th wedding anniversary in 1897 brought the entire family back to the old cabin for a celebration. 36 grandchildren swarmed the property, along with 5 adult children and their spouses. Marcus and Tabitha held court on the porch, watching the chaos with joy and satisfaction. Matthew, now a prosperous farmer and grandfather himself, gave a toast. "To my parents, who taught us that love means commitment, that family is everything, and that limitations only matter if you let them. Papa, you showed us what it means to be a man by how you cherished Mama. Mama, you showed us what it means to be strong by never letting anything stop you from living fully. We're all here because of you, because of the example you set. Thank you." Marcus pulled Tabitha close, and she rested her head on his shoulder as their family cheered. Later, when the celebration wound down and the grandchildren were bedded down in every available space, Marcus carried Tabitha to their room as he had every night for 40 years. "We did good," he said, settling her gently on the bed. "We did," she agreed. "I never imagined this life, Marcus. Never dreamed I could have so much. Neither did I. I thought I'd die alone in these mountains, probably during some harsh winter. Instead, I got you and a family I don't deserve. You deserve everything good in this world." He undressed her carefully, mindful of her aching joints, and helped her into her nightgown. Then he climbed in beside her and pulled her close, her back to his chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. This was how they'd slept for 40 years, her body tucked against his, safe and warm and loved. "Marcus," she said into the darkness, "if you had it to do over, would you change anything?" "Not a single thing." His breath was warm against her neck. "Well, maybe I would have walked into that mercantile a week earlier so we could have had a few more days together. But otherwise, no. Everything happened exactly as it should have. Even my clubfoot, especially your clubfoot. It's part of you, and I wouldn't change a single part of you." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Sleep now, love. I've got you." She smiled and closed her eyes, surrounded by warmth and love and the solid presence of the man who'd loved her unconditionally for 4 decades. Outside, the mountains stood silent under stars, watching over the cabin and its sleeping occupants. The wild west of their youth had faded into history, replaced by progress and civilization, but in this valley, time seemed suspended, held fast by love and memory. Marcus Wade died peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 74. He went to bed holding Tabitha as he had every night of their married life, and simply didn't wake. Tabitha discovered him in the morning, still wrapped around her, his face peaceful in death. Though her heart shattered, she found comfort in knowing he'd left this world doing what he loved most, protecting and cherishing her. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, before following him into whatever lay beyond. She died in the same bed, in the same cabin, in the same position she'd slept for 45 years, as if waiting for Marcus to return and hold her once more. They were buried side by side in the family cemetery on the hill overlooking the cabin, beneath matching headstones. Matthew, now gray-haired himself, stood with his siblings and their families as the preacher spoke final words. They loved each other, the preacher said simply. In a world that told them their love was impossible, they chose each other anyway. They built a life, raised a family, and proved that the limitations others place on us don't have to define us. Marcus Wade saw Tabitha Jensen not as damaged or less than, but as the woman she truly was, strong, capable, and worthy of devoted love. And Tabitha saw Marcus not as rough and uncivilized, but as the good man he truly was, protective, faithful, and capable of profound tenderness. They saved each other, in every way people can be saved. As the family dispersed after the service, Maria stayed behind at the graves. She was 65 now, widowed herself, but she remembered her parents' love as clearly as if she were still a child watching them on the porch. "You know," she said to Matthew, who'd lingered as well, "I used to think all marriages were like theirs. It wasn't until I was grown that I realized how rare what they had was." "They set an impossible standard," Matthew agreed, "but I'm glad they did. It showed us what to aspire to." "You think Papa really didn't mind caring for Mama the way he did, especially at the end?" Matthew smiled. "Mind? Maria, caring for her was his greatest joy. You saw how he looked at her even after 50 years. She was everything to him. Carrying her when she was tired, helping her when she struggled, it was never a burden. It was how he showed his love." "I hope someone loves me like that someday," Maria's youngest granddaughter said. She'd been listening quietly, absorbing the story of her great-grandparents. "Then look for someone who sees your true worth," Matthew told her. "Someone who loves you not despite your flaws, but as a complete package, flaws included. That's what your great-grandfather did, and that's what made their love last." The family eventually left the cemetery, but the story of Marcus and Tabitha Wade lived on. It was told to children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren and beyond, becoming family legend. The story of the club-footed girl who was told she'd never marry, never keep house, never have a family, and the mountain man who loved her so completely that he carried her whenever she tired, proving that true love sees no limitations, only possibilities. The cabin still stands in that valley between the hills, preserved by descendants who understand its significance. Visitors can see the special chair Marcus built for Tabitha, the cradle he carved for their first child, the expanded rooms that grew with their family. But more than physical objects, they can feel the love that soaked into every board and beam, the devotion that made a rough mountain cabin into a home filled with laughter and joy and unwavering commitment. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispers through the pine trees, locals swear you can still hear them. A deep voice murmuring endearments, a lighter voice laughing in response, the sound of two souls who found each other against all odds and chose love over prejudice, acceptance over judgment, partnership over limitation. The church ladies of Clifton Hill had been wrong. Tabitha Jensen hadn't needed to be whole to keep house or have a family. She'd only needed Marcus Wade, who understood that wholeness isn't about physical perfection, but about two imperfect people choosing to build a complete life together. She'd needed a man who didn't flinch from her twisted foot, who built her special moccasins and carried her over rough ground, who proved day after day that love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone perfect for you. Their great-great-granddaughter, Clara, visited the old cabin on her wedding day in 1965, nearly a century after Marcus and Tabitha's wedding. She stood in the main room where they'd lived and loved, placed her hand on the mantle Marcus had carved, and made a silent promise. She would love her new husband the way her ancestors had loved each other, completely, devotedly, without reservation. She would build a partnership based on mutual respect and unwavering support. She would remember that true strength lies not in physical perfection, but in choosing to see the beauty in imperfection, the value in difference, the possibility in what others dismiss as impossible. As she left the cabin, she noticed fresh wildflowers on the porch, the same mountain flowers Marcus had once brought Tabitha. Someone in the family still left them there, a tribute to the love that started it all, the foundation upon which generations had been built. Clara smiled, touched the flowers gently, and walked toward her future, carrying with her the legacy of a club-footed girl who was told she'd never keep house, and a mountain man who carried her whenever she tired, proving that the most powerful force in the world isn't strength or beauty or physical perfection, but simple, steadfast, unconditional love. The story had come full circle, from prediction of failure to proof of possibility, from whispered doubts to lasting legacy. And somewhere, in whatever realm souls inhabit after death, Marcus Wade still held Tabitha Jensen Wade in his arms, still whispered that she was beautiful, still promised to carry her whenever she needed, for all eternity. Their love had defied expectations, overcome obstacles, and built something lasting and true. It had proven that the limitations others place on us are meaningless in the face of genuine acceptance and devotion. It had shown that being whole has nothing to do with physical perfection, and everything to do with finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and loves everything they see. In the Wild West town of Clifton Hill, Missouri, where church ladies once predicted spinsterhood for a girl with a clubfoot, a different story was now told. The story of Tabitha and Marcus Wade, whose love transcended physical limitation, social expectation, and human prejudice. The story of a man who saw worth where others saw damage, beauty where others saw flaw, possibility where others saw only limitation. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy they left behind. Not the cabin or the descendants or the family stories, but the fundamental truth that love, real love, sees no obstacles. It simply sees the beloved, accepts them completely, and commits to walking beside them or carrying them through whatever life brings. The Wild West had been tamed, the frontier settled, the rough edges smoothed by civilization. But the love Marcus and Tabitha Wade shared remained as wild and untamed as the mountains where they'd built their life, as enduring as the stones that marked their graves, as powerful as the day Marcus first walked into that mercantile and saw not a crippled girl, but his future, his home, his everything. Their story ended where all good stories should, with a life fully lived, a love completely expressed, and a legacy that would outlast them both by generations. They'd proven the doubters wrong, fulfilled dreams thought impossible, and built something beautiful from materials others had dismissed as insufficient. And when the final accounting was made, when their lives were measured and weighed, the verdict was clear. They had loved well, lived fully, and left the world better than they'd found it, one carried step at a time.